Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and any suggestions in the comments, and I might give you a shout out at the end of my next video. Thanks for being here and for all your amazing support. I was 20 the first winter I worked the overnight shift at the Dollar Tree on Alderbrook Avenue in Brenton, Washington. I didn't picture myself there at that age. 3 semesters of community college had bled my savings dry, and my vague plans to study environmental science dissolved under the weight of overdue bills. My mom's part-time job at the hospital kept the lights on after my dad's back injury put him on disability, but it was barely enough. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I liked the small crew I worked with. The store closed at midnight on weekdays and 2 in the morning on weekends, which meant our customer mix was equal parts night owl college kids, graveyard shift workers grabbing snacks, and a scattering of lonely people who wandered the aisles just to be somewhere bright and warm for a while. Carl, our manager, was the sort of guy who cracked terrible jokes but meant well. The kind of man who could grumble about inventory all night and then quietly help you carry a heavy box to your car after closing. I worked Friday through Sunday nights. It was routine, predictable in a way I found comforting. But in February of 2004, I swapped a Saturday shift with Denise so I could go to my cousin's engagement dinner. A harmless decision, I thought. At the time, I never considered how it might carve a fault line through my life. That night the rain came in steady sheets, the kind that blurred traffic lights into bleeding halos. After dinner I stepped outside the restaurant, jacket collar turned up against the wind. My old flip phone buzzed in my pocket. The number on the screen was the store I almost didn't answer. "Yeah?" I said, pressing it to my ear. It was Carl, but his voice didn't sound like him. Flat, hollow. "I need you to come down here," he said. "Now." "What happened?" He paused just long enough for my pulse to start hammering. Something happened." "Carl, what?" "They're gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I'll explain when you get here. Just come." The drive from my apartment to the store was 8 minutes, but I remember each streetlight like a frozen photograph. The rain made the world slick and warped. I turned onto Alderbrook Avenue and saw them, 2 police cruisers blocking the entrance, lights spinning in slow, dizzy circles. Another sat by the loading dock. An officer stepped into my headlights and held out a hand, but Carl appeared behind him, waving me forward. His baseball cap was gone, hair plastered to his forehead. Yellow tape fluttered across the glass doors, glistening in the rain. My boots splashed shallow puddles as I crossed the lot. "They're gone," Carl said again, and his voice cracked on the word. "Denise, Gary, Luann." I stared at him, waiting for something, anything that would make it make sense. He didn't give it, just turned toward the store. Inside, the fluorescent lights were off, and the green glow of the exit signs threw long shadows down the aisles. A detective in a rain-dark jacket nodded us past. The registers were open, drawers pulled out and spilling coins. The office door stood wide, the safe gaping. "They took about $7,000, Carl murmured. $7,000 was more than we ever kept in cash, unless a deposit hadn't gone out. We passed the stockroom door, and that's when I smelled it. Gunpowder, and something faintly metallic. My breath caught. They were lying on the floor, face down, arms tucked under their chests. Each had a small, dark wound in the back of the head. No splatter on the walls. Whoever did it had fired close and clean. I stumbled back and out the rear door, bracing myself against the wet brick, retching until my stomach emptied. Rain plastered my hair to my face. The detectives questioned me for hours in the cramped office, their voices low but unrelenting. Who had keys? Who'd been fired recently? Who owed money? One name came up again and again, Darren Blake. He'd managed the store until Carl caught him skimming from the till the previous summer. Darren didn't yell or curse when he was let go. He just looked at each of us in turn. like he was pressing our faces into memory. By dawn, the rain had stopped. My mom picked me up in silence. That night, the news called it the worst triple homicide in Brenton's history. They said police believed Darren showed up before closing with at least one other person, forced the crew to open the safe, then marched them to the stockroom. Execution style, the anchor said without blinking. Darren's mugshot came up, dark eyes, shaved head, an expression that gave away nothing. The store stayed closed for nearly a month. On February 28th, a tip claimed Darren was hiding in Spokane, but by the time police moved, he was gone. His girlfriend got 10 years for driving the getaway car. His cousin got the same for accessory. Darren stayed missing. Life went on. Brenton grew. New strip malls, more traffic. But the murders were a scar that didn't fade. America's Most Wanted covered the case in 2005, Unsolved Files in 2006. Each ended with the same caption: "The suspect remains at large." I tried to leave it behind, but the truth was, I'd been one shift swap away from being on that floor. Some nights I still dreamed of the smell, gunpowder and metal, and woke with my hands clenched. Over the years, the paranoia didn't vanish. It just changed shape. I started scanning crowds without meaning to, glancing in mirrors a little too long, avoiding parking garages at night. Sometimes, when I was walking home from the bus stop, I'd hear footsteps a beat behind mine. I'd turn and see no one, but my chest would stay tight until I was through my door. When I thought of Darren, I didn't picture him on the run in the woods. I pictured him in line at a grocery store, wearing a baseball cap, nodding politely to the cashier. People think fugitives disappear. I think the smart ones blend in. That was how I lived for 20 years until last winter, when the past stopped waiting for me to think about it and showed up instead. Last December, the families held a candlelight vigil in the Dollar Tree parking lot. It had been 20 years to the day since the murders. I almost didn't go. I told myself it was pointless, that I wouldn't know what to say to anyone after all this time. But when the evening came, I found myself driving down Alderbrook Avenue, watching the same asphalt glisten under the same sodium lights. The rain had settled into a fine drizzle by the time I parked. People clustered under pop-up canopies, shoulders hunched against the cold. A folding table held framed photographs of the three of them: Denise in her softball uniform, Gary holding his toddler on a fishing trip, Luann caught mid-laugh in a bright sweater. The pastor spoke for a while, words I barely heard over the low hiss of rain on nylon. Then he asked if anyone who had worked with them wanted to share something. I didn't plan to speak, but my legs carried me forward anyway. I told them how Denise once stayed 2 hours late to help me reset an end cap because I looked overwhelmed. How Gary brought me coffee from the diner next door every night without fail. How Luann talked about going back to school for nursing, saying life was too short not to try. My voice shook, but I kept going until I'd said all I could. When I stepped back, I felt lighter. Not healed, just slightly less weighed down. People drifted away after the candles burned low. I stood at the edge of the lot, watching the rain make mirrors out of the asphalt. That's when I saw him, tall, straight-backed, hood pulled low, hands in his pockets, standing near the spot where Pump 3 used to be before they paved over the old gas station. He turned slightly, and I caught the outline of ink above his waistband, a coiled snake, just like the one Darren had tattooed on his stomach. My chest tightened. A bus rolled past, blocking my view for a moment. When it moved on, he was gone. Maybe it was just some stranger with a snake tattoo. Or maybe the past had wandered back, curious to see how its work had aged. I didn't follow. I got in my truck and drove home, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. No headlights followed me. For the next week, I saw him everywhere. At the hardware store just beyond the racks of salt bags. Outside the post office, leaning against the wall as I crossed the lot. Always gone by the time I looked twice. I stopped sleeping through the night. Every sound outside my apartment seemed amplified. The crunch of tires over gravel, a door slamming 2 blocks away, the whistle of wind through the alley. Then the envelope came. No return address. My name in block letters. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed me from behind, standing at the vigil table. My head was bent toward Luan's photo, the candlelight catching my hair. On the back, written in black marker, "You should have been there." My hand shook as I set it down. I didn't call the police. What would I say? They'd think it was a sick prank. Maybe it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever took it had been close enough to touch me. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, unhurried. I reached for my phone but didn't turn on the light. The steps moved toward the back of the building, fading into the wind. When I finally slept again, I dreamed of the stockroom. Denise, Gary, and Luann lying face down, only this time they were whispering, voices muffled but urgent. I couldn't make out the words. When I woke, I still felt the press of their presence in the room. It built until I couldn't pretend it was all in my head. On a Thursday night just past midnight, I heard a knock. Not loud, 3 soft taps, like someone trying not to wake the neighbors. I stood there in the dark, listening to my own breath. Another 3 taps. When I finally moved to the peephole, the hallway was empty. The final night came a week later. It was raining again, just like that February night in 2004. I'd left the blinds half open without thinking, and sometime after midnight I felt the prickling weight of being watched. I turned my head slowly. In the narrow strip of glass, reflected in the parking lot below, a figure stood between the streetlights. Hood up, hands in pockets, the same stillness, the same height. He didn't move as I stepped closer to the window. My pulse pounded in my ears. When I reached for my phone, the light from the screen lit the room for an instant. And in that instant, the figure was gone. But not before I saw it. The snake. Black ink, coiled tight. I don't remember going to bed that night. In the morning, my truck had a fresh scrape along the driver's side door, and a single quarter sat on the windshield wiper. Heads up. I stared at it for a long time before pocketing it. I still don't know if it was him. Maybe it was just a man who liked snakes and standing still in the rain. Maybe the quarter was just a coincidence. But every time I pass the Dollar Tree, I remember the sound of Carl's voice over the phone that night. They're gone. And I wonder if one day when I'm crossing a parking lot or unlocking my door, I'll hear that same voice, closer this time, right behind me, saying, "Now it's your turn." It's strange how you can walk through your life thinking you're safe, thinking you've built some invisible wall between yourself and everything terrible that happens to other people. You tell yourself it's because you live in the right kind of place, with the right kind of neighbors, where the air smells faintly of cut grass in the summer and wood smoke in the fall. You convince yourself the darkness stops at the edges of town, that your locked doors and morning routines are enough to keep it out. I used to believe that. I clung to it like religion, until the day I learned that safety is just a story you tell yourself to keep from seeing how thin the glass really is. I had been in Marrow Creek for less than a year when it started. Not much more than a dot on a map, the kind of place most people speed through without realizing it's a town at all. You wouldn't think it had teeth. We had one main street, one gas station, a single diner that never closed except on Christmas, and a Dollar Tree that stood like a green and white monument to the stubborn ordinariness of the place. The sidewalks cracked under decades of frost heave. The streetlights flickered in no discernible pattern, and the air smelled faintly of the paper mill 10 miles out. It wasn't pretty, but it was quiet, and quiet was what I needed. I'd been crashing on my sister's couch in Millerton before this, 6 weeks of stepping over laundry piles and pretending not to notice the tension between her and her husband. When I found the 3rd floor 1-bedroom on Larkspur Lane, it felt like a gift. Not much, just a tired brick building shaped like a U, the kind with narrow hallways that smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. My windows looked out over the parking lot, and if I leaned out far enough, I could see the dull silver roof of the Dollar Tree down the road. Rent was low. The neighbors nodded but didn't pry. It was mine. My life there was small, but it was mine, and I filled it with small rituals. Walking to the store, lingering over coffee at the diner, sitting on my balcony at dusk watching the last light catch in the branches of the maples across the street. I worked part-time at the bookstore by the post office. I liked walking to work, liked knowing each crack in the sidewalk, each front yard that smelled faintly of lilacs in spring. I knew when Mrs. Bragg at the corner house put out her Halloween decorations, when the high school kids started hanging around outside the gas station, when the street sweeper made its rounds. Knowing these things made me feel anchored, in control. That Wednesday started out like any other. Early spring, mud still clinging stubbornly to the grass, but the snow finally gone from the sidewalks. It was one of those afternoons that can't make up its mind. A cool shadow here, a warm pocket of sunlight there. I'd done a load of laundry that morning and realized, as I folded my towels, that I was out of trash bags and dish soap. It wasn't urgent, but the day was too nice to waste indoors. I grabbed my hoodie, stuffed a few crumpled bills into my pocket, and slipped my earbuds in. Not too loud, just enough to keep me company. I took my usual route down Maple, past the post office with its sun-faded flag, and cut through the empty lot behind it. The grass there was still flattened from winter, brittle and pale. I rounded the corner toward the Dollar Tree, passing the shuttered video store that still had a sun-bleached new releases poster taped inside the glass. Inside, the store was its usual fluorescent hum. A couple of teenagers were in the candy aisle, pretending not to shoplift. A mother wrestled a box of fruit snacks from her kid's grip. A man in his 60s studied the back of a frozen dinner like it might reveal the meaning of life if he read it long enough. I moved quick. Soap, bags, a bag of trail mix for later, and found myself behind a woman with a stack of coupons so thick it looked like she'd been saving them for years. I didn't mind. Time wasn't pressing. The air outside smelled sharper somehow. Fresh grass tangled with the chemical bite of gasoline, the kind of scent that yanked me back to summers as a kid, helping my dad mow the lawn. I put my earbuds back in, low volume, and started for home. I was thinking about whether to heat up the last slice of pizza or make mac and cheese when I noticed it. The white sedan pulled out of the lot just a few seconds after I stepped onto the sidewalk. Mid-size, generic, too clean to be old, too plain to be memorable. At first it was nothing. People leave stores, people drive home. But it didn't pass me, didn't turn off, it just stayed there, matching my pace. I told myself not to be dramatic. It's a small town, people drive slow, but then the gap closed. 10 feet. 6. 4. The tires whispered over the pavement, keeping rhythm with my steps. The window rolled down. "Hey," the driver said. Even over my music the tone cut through. I paused the track with my thumb, pretending to fumble with the cord. The voice wasn't friendly. It wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of voice people use when they're used to being obeyed. "Director, get in." The words hit me like I'd stepped into the wrong room and found something I was never meant to see. "What?" "Get in," he repeated, slower this time. "Hurry up." I turned to look at him fully. Mid to late 30s, pale skin, the barest fuzz of hair at his temples under a gray hoodie, sunglasses that hid half his face. He had the look of someone designed to be overlooked, the kind of man you'd forget 5 seconds after seeing him. I was sure I'd never seen him before. "You've got the wrong person," I said, keeping my voice level. He didn't flinch, didn't even seem to hear me. "You need to get in now." Something in the air shifted then. My palms felt colder, my breathing heavier. The world narrowed until there was only the stretch of road between me and him. I took a slow step back from the curb. "Do I know you?" No answer. The car crept forward as I sped up, turned down the next block. The tires followed, a steady, stalking pace. I took another left, another. Each time the sedan mirrored me, my throat tightened. Sweat gathered behind my neck. There was an alley between two buildings, a slit of shadow too narrow for a car. I didn't think. I bolted. My sneakers slapped against the cracked pavement, the sound ricocheting off the brick walls. I didn't stop until I hit the far street, lungs burning. I ducked behind a recycling bin, forcing my breath into shallow pulls. Silence. Then, nothing. I waited a full minute before moving. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe it was over. I kept off my usual route, cutting through side streets, glancing over my shoulder. And then I saw it again. The same sedan, this time coming toward me from the opposite direction. Panic hit like a hand closing around my throat. I cut across someone's yard, vaulted a low fence, twisted my ankle but kept running. I dropped behind a hedge, heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it. Through the branches I saw him roll by, slow, scanning the houses. The car paused. Then it moved on. I stayed frozen until my muscles screamed. Then I zigzagged the rest of the way, darting through backyards and alleys until my building came into sight. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, keys fumbling in the lock, breath shuddering. Inside, I threw every bolt, every chain. That's when I heard it. A low hum of an engine outside. I edged to the window, peeling the blinds back with one finger. The sedan sat across the street. The man stepped out. He looked up, right at me. And then he walked toward the front entrance of my building. I stopped breathing. His hand wrapped around the handle, rattled it. The door held. He didn't knock, didn't shout, just stood there for a moment. Then, as casually as if he'd remembered something he'd left on the stove, he turned, got back in his car and drove away. No hurry, like he had all the time in the world. I never saw him again. But sometimes, when I walk to my car in the morning, I feel the weight of someone's eyes on my back. Sometimes I dream about that moment at the curb, his voice cutting into my day like a blade. And sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if I'd obeyed? If I'd gotten in? If he'd already decided for me? It started as one of those nights where you make a decision you don't even think twice about, until later, when your mind replays it in loops you can't shut off. I wasn't supposed to end up at the Dollar General that night. It just wasn't my kind of store. Not that I had anything against it, there was no moral stance involved, it just didn't fit the way I like to shop. I was a one-and-done kind of person. Bigger stores, fuller carts, one stop, and then home. But I'd been putting off a trip to the supermarket all week, convincing myself I could stretch what I had at home. That night, my kitchen finally called my bluff. I was out of dish soap. The snack cabinet was down to stale pretzels and a can of peaches I wasn't about to open. And the remote was dead. I needed batteries, and it was already later than I wanted to be out. The closest place still open was the Dollar General just 2 blocks away. I told myself it was perfect. Quick in, quick out. I even told myself it might be cozy, in a small town sort of way. That's how I ended up there at 7:30 on a Tuesday in early spring, stepping out into air that had gone oddly still. The sun had disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the sky a heavy navy blue, like the night had swallowed everything except for a last thin streak of silver above the rooftops. The parking lot was half empty. 4, maybe 5 cars scattered without pattern. The Dollar General sat between a nail salon and a liquor store, both already closed. Their darkened windows reflected nothing but shadows. It wasn't just quiet. It was a weighted kind of quiet, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. The stillness pressed on me in a way I couldn't name. I told myself I was overthinking it and went in. The automatic doors slid open with a reluctant hiss, and immediately the silence felt wrong. No soft pop music leaking from ceiling speakers. No idle conversation between employees. Just the faint electrical buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The air had that unmoving, dusty cool feel of a place that had been sealed shut all day. Somewhere far down the left aisle, an elderly woman leaned in toward a shelf, holding a can at arm's length like she needed the full distance to focus on the label. On the opposite end, a man in a gray hoodie hovered near the freezer section, his head bent, door open longer than it needed to be. I saw only one employee, someone stocking shelves at the very back, methodically transferring boxes from a cart without looking up. The whole space felt fractionally off. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point at and say, that's the thing, but in the subtle way a crooked picture frame catches your eye even when you're not trying to look. I pushed it aside, telling myself I'd be quick. Dish soap, candy bars, AA batteries, enough to keep my weekend running without a real grocery run. I was already making my way to the register when I noticed him. He stood behind the counter scanning a pack of gum for the only customer in line, a middle-aged man in a windbreaker. The cashier looked mid-30s, wiry build, with stringy dark hair that clung to his forehead like it hadn't been washed in a couple days. His Dollar General polo was wrinkled, the collar bent. A brownish stain spread across the chest, too uneven to be coffee but too faded to identify. The customer left, and suddenly it was just the two of us. I set my things down. He didn't look up right away, just reached for the dish soap, turning it over slowly in his hands before smirking faintly. "Dish soap, huh?" he said, voice low and almost amused. "Lot of dishes waiting on you." It wasn't the words so much as the way he said them, like it was an inside joke I wasn't aware I'd told. "Yeah, I guess so," I said, with the kind of dry chuckle people use to smooth over awkwardness. He rolled the batteries between his fingers like he was feeling for a secret inside them. "These for something special? Gotta power up something real important." The corner of my smile stiffened. "Just the remote," I said, casual but short. Most cashiers make small talk about the weather, about sales. They don't break down every item you buy, looking at each like it's a clue. He bagged my things with deliberate slowness. Still smiling, no, grinning now, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said finally, dragging out the word, "I'm off now." Then he reached up and flicked off the light above his register. I figured he meant his shift was over. Fine. Maybe he was clocking out. But when I stepped toward the door, I heard him behind me. Not just walking in the same direction, matching my pace exactly. I kept my eyes forward. "So," he said, his voice drifting closer. "Where you going after this?" It hit me like a static charge. Not a friendly question, not even a nosy one. Something hungrier. "Just heading home," I said. He gave a low, rasping chuckle. "Oh yeah? Where's home?" My feet kept moving, but every instinct I had wanted to stop. His tone wasn't curious. It was invasive, like he'd reached into my pocket without permission. "Just a few minutes away," I muttered. The door slid open. Night air hit me, but instead of breaking off toward a car, he kept walking beside me. Perfectly beside me. His steps made this faint, gritty scrape against the pavement in perfect time with mine. "You should come with me," he said suddenly. I stopped. "What?" He tilted his head, squinting like I was the strange one. "I just said, you should come with me. My car's right there." He jabbed a finger toward a black sedan a few spots down. The back passenger window was covered in cloudy plastic sheeting, the tape edges curling. I gave him the kind of laugh you give a stranger who's clearly joking badly. "No thanks." I stepped toward my own car. So did he. "I really gotta get going," I said, sharper this time. I reached for my door handle, but before I could pull it open, his hand shot out, yanking the door wide and slamming it back against the frame with a hollow thud. He stepped in, too close, blocking my space. His breath smelled like stale coffee and something sour. My stomach dropped cold. I didn't think. I turned and ran. Keys still clutched in my hand, useless now except as a weapon. His footsteps hit the pavement after me, heavy, fast, closer than I wanted to believe. They echoed through the nearly empty strip mall like they belonged to something bigger. Walgreens was at the far end, my only chance. My legs burned, lungs tightening. But I kept going, every nerve in my body tuned to the rhythm of his pursuit. The automatic doors parted, spilling warm, artificial light onto the sidewalk just as I reached them. I stumbled inside, colliding with a cardboard display of Halloween decorations. A teenage girl behind the counter stared, eyes wide. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I spun. The man was gone. Her voice barely registered at first. My ears were still filled with the echo of his footsteps, the hot rush of blood behind my eyes. I stood there gulping air, heart still hammering against my ribs, scanning the glass doors as if he might reappear any second. He didn't. The strip mall outside was just an expanse of dim yellow parking lights and shadowed cars, nothing moving. My throat felt raw. I think a guy was following me. The cashier's expression shifted from startled to something tighter, half concern, half not wanting to get involved. "Do you want me to call the police?" I nodded too quickly. "Yes, please." She picked up the store phone, speaking into it with a calmness that made me feel like I was the only one panicking. I paced in a narrow loop near the register, forcing myself to stay in the light. My hands shook so badly it took me 3 tries to get my phone out of my pocket. I dialed 911 anyway, telling them I was at the Walgreens on Eastwood Plaza, that a man had followed me from Dollar General and tried to keep me from getting into my car. The dispatcher's voice was steady, patient, too steady, like she was careful not to match my fear. She told me officers were on the way. 5 minutes, maybe less. 5 minutes is an eternity when you're sure someone's still out there. I kept glancing at the glass, expecting his face to appear, pressed against it, smiling that wrong smile. Instead, red and blue lights washed over the lot. 2 cruisers slid into view, doors opening before they'd even stopped. I gave them the short, fast version of what happened, each word pulling me back into the moment. The running, the sound of his breath behind me, that hand slamming my car door back like it was his. They didn't say much, just split up and started sweeping the lot with flashlights. One officer ducked behind the liquor store, another circled the nail salon. I stood with the youngest of them, a tall, clean-shaven guy who asked me to point out my car and the direction the man's sedan had been. My voice kept catching when I said his car, like naming it was giving it weight. They didn't find him. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. When we went back toward Dollar General, the fluorescent lights were still buzzing inside. The same employee I'd seen stocking shelves was there, leaning against a cart like he'd been waiting for someone to tell him what to do. He was mid-20s maybe, wearing a yellow work vest over a hoodie, expression unreadable. One of the officers asked if he knew who had been working the register earlier. "Yeah," he said immediately. "That was Mark." The name felt wrong in my head. Too ordinary. The officer's pen scratched against his notepad. "Last name?" The employee rattled it off without hesitation. Then, almost casually, "He's been here like 2 years." I caught something else in his tone, not surprise, not outrage, just a flat acceptance like this wasn't new. "Has there ever been any trouble with him?" the officer asked. The kid's eyes flicked toward me for a second before he answered. "Yeah, there've been complaints, mostly from women." A shrug. "Management knows, I guess nothing stuck." The words made something inside me go cold. By the time they found him, hours later in an apartment not far from here, I was back home, sitting on my couch in the dark, my bag from Dollar General still untouched on the counter. They told me he didn't resist, that he had a history, which is a thin way of saying there'd been chances to stop him before me, and no one had taken them. For the next few nights I dreamed about the parking lot, not the part where I ran, not the Walgreens doors opening like a lifeline. The moment before that, standing at my car, his hand on the door, his breath in my face. In the dream, I don't run, I freeze, and then I wake up with my whole body locked. In daylight I told myself it was over. I was lucky. Lucky I ran. Lucky the Walgreens was open. Lucky his grip had been on the door, not on me. But there's something that gets in your head after something like that. You start re-seeing the world in terms of all the invisible choices that could have ended you. What if I'd gone to the bigger store like I always do? What if I'd parked closer to the sedan without noticing? What if he'd waited until I was halfway home to follow me instead? Luck feels thin when you look at it too long. A week later, I caught myself circling a grocery store lot twice because a man was walking the same row of cars I'd parked in. He never even looked at me, but I could hear the scrape of his shoes in my head, matching my steps. I don't shop at night anymore, not anywhere, because there's something I keep thinking about, something I can't shake. When I was running toward Walgreens, when I glanced back, just once, he wasn't smiling anymore. He looked calm, like he'd already decided something, and I still don't know what. I used to think the quiet parts of life were where you could breathe, where the edges of the day softened enough to let your shoulders drop and your mind go quiet. But lately, I've started to think that's exactly when something bad slips in. Quietly, politely, almost as if it's been waiting for you to relax before making itself known. The winter I started working at the Dollar Tree on East Jackson Street, I was convinced I'd chosen a job that was too uneventful for anything like that to happen. It was walking distance from my apartment in a small Indiana town, 4 blocks if I cut behind the laundromat, 5 if the snow was deep enough that I had to stick to shoveled sidewalks. It wasn't glamorous. The floor tiles were warped near the freezer section, the air smelled faintly of floor cleaner and cardboard, and customers occasionally came in to complain about a missing quarter, like it was a personal betrayal. But the schedule was steady. The pay covered rent and groceries if I budgeted right, and most nights I could clock out without feeling like I'd been chewed up. After the year I'd had, that felt like enough. Before I came here, I worked at a small print shop 2 towns over. It was the kind of place that smelled like ink and paper dust, where I could lose myself in the whir of the machines. That ended in a way I still can't describe without feeling my chest get tight. My girlfriend Melanie died. Suddenly, violently, in a way that made people lower their voices when they said her name. I left that town less than 2 months later, cut contact with almost everyone who'd known me before, and rebuilt myself into someone who didn't talk much about the past. Only a few people in my life now know about Melanie. My friend Eric is one of them, and I never talk about her at work. The night it happened was a Thursday in early March. The store was as quiet as it ever got, just the hum of the refrigerators and the soft, uneven buzz from the flickering sign out front. We close at 10, but my manager, Brian, likes to leave the closing work to me and one other cashier, which usually means I'm still there until almost 11. That night, it was me and Marissa. She's in her early 20s, always wears a faded jean jacket even indoors, and talks with the kind of energy that makes you wonder if she ever actually gets tired. Around 9:45, I was straightening a display of fake flowers, cheap plastic stems and colors no real plant would ever be, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I thought it might be Eric asking if I wanted to grab food after work, but instead, the notification said, "Sophie wants to send you a message on Instagram." The name didn't ring a bell. I opened her profile and saw a girl in her mid-20s with long dark brown hair, round glasses, and a faint smile. She was wearing a pale green hoodie in the picture. Normal enough, but her eyes, hazel, warm, familiar, made my stomach feel weird. She had replied to my story from earlier that day, a photo of the empty store with the caption, "Closing time is the best time." Her reply was a single laughing emoji. I almost ignored it, but boredom got the better of me, so I sent back a smiley face. She responded almost instantly. "You don't remember me, do you?" I frowned. "Sorry. Should I?" "Sophie, we met last summer. You were with your friends." "Where?" "Silver Pines." Silver Pines. I'd been there exactly once, 9 months ago, on a weekend trip with some coworkers from the print shop. It was a small lakeside town about an hour away. I remembered the boardwalk, a fire pit by the motel, and a long rainy afternoon where I walked by myself for hours. But I didn't remember meeting anyone named Sophie. I don't think so, I typed. Are you sure? I'm positive, she replied. You told me about your girlfriend, about what happened. My fingers went still over the screen. That wasn't possible. I'd barely spoken to anyone in Silver Pines, and I definitely hadn't told anyone about Melanie. No way, I didn't tell anyone that. You did. You were sitting on the dock. I was with my cousin. You said her name was Melanie, and you were drinking one of those little Jack Daniels bottles. A knot formed in my stomach. That detail, the name, the dock, the drink, it was too specific to be guessed. I had taken a couple of those small bottles with me on that trip. I'd sat on the dock late one evening, yes, but I was alone. At least I thought I was. I scrolled through her profile. Around 400 followers, maybe 100 posts, pictures with friends, a few selfies, a lot of nature shots. One was of her standing in front of a lake I instantly recognized as Silver Pines, wearing the same pale green hoodie from her profile picture. I'm sorry, I typed. I honestly don't remember you. That's fine, she said. I just thought maybe we could talk again. I liked that night. There was a pause before another message came through. Also, tell your friend Eric I'm sorry about what happened in the parking lot. I stared at the words until they blurred. Eric's tire had been slashed in the store parking lot about 2 months ago during a late shift. We never figured out who did it, and it had never been mentioned online. I hadn't even told anyone outside of work. How do you know about that? I typed. You told me at Silver Pines, she replied. I'm telling you, I don't remember that. Maybe you were drunk, it's okay. I set my phone face down on the counter. My hands felt colder than they should have. This was either someone playing an incredibly elaborate game, or it was something else. Something I didn't have a name for. At 10:15, I clocked out and went to the back for my bag. Marissa asked if I was all right, and I told her I was just tired. Outside, the lot was mostly empty. Just my car and Marissa's under the dim yellow glow of the streetlights. The air smelled faintly metallic like snow was coming. Halfway to my car, my phone buzzed again. Sophie had sent a photo. Against every instinct I had, I opened it. It was me, taken that night, walking toward my car. Same jacket, same beanie, same scuffed sneakers. The photo was from behind, but in the reflection of my car window I could see her, standing close, too close. Hazel eyes, high cheekbones, the exact face I saw whenever I thought of Melanie. I dropped my phone. My pulse roared in my ears. Melanie was dead. I'd been at her funeral. I'd watched them lower the coffin. Hey, you coming? Marissa's voice broke through the fog. I grabbed my phone and got into my car without looking at the messages again. By the time I got home and locked the door behind me, it was past 11. My apartment was quiet, but the air felt heavy. I finally checked my phone. The last message from Sophie was just 3 words. I miss you. I didn't respond. I couldn't sleep either. The next evening, when I got to work, there was a note taped to the front door. No name, no signature. Just 3 words in neat slanted handwriting. See you soon. It began in that quiet, shapeless part of the evening when the day has already collapsed in on itself, but the night hasn't quite found its edges. I was sprawled on my couch, bare feet tucked under me, the loose gray sweatpants I'd owned for more than a decade hanging comfortably at my hips, frayed cuffs brushing the carpet. Those sweatpants were my unofficial signal to the world that the day was over. Once I was in them, I wasn't going anywhere, not for anyone. The radiator in the corner was knocking again, those hollow, uneven thumps that always made me think of old bones tapping against each other. It wasn't loud enough to be disruptive, more like the background noise of a house reminding you it's alive. Outside, the rain had been falling since late afternoon, not in sheets or storms, but in a thin, steady drizzle that turned the streets into black rivers of reflected light. It had the kind of persistence that seeped into your mood, like the whole world was slowly being softened and blurred at the edges. I had a half-empty mug of coffee cooling on the table beside me, my phone in one hand, the TV muted and flickering with some old sitcom I wasn't paying attention to. The day had been one long chain of minor irritations at work, emails that contradicted each other, meetings that dragged on without resolution, and I'd promised myself a quiet night of doing nothing. That was the plan until I remembered the toothpaste. It had been running low for days, down to the point where each squeeze gave me nothing but an apologetic gasp of air. This morning I'd coaxed out the last smear, telling myself I'd stop at the store after work. But after work had turned into after dinner, and after dinner had turned into now. My kitchen sponge was a thin, flattened husk. I was out of deodorant. I'd used my last coffee filter yesterday. Little things, not urgent, but they had a way of piling up in my head until they felt like they were pressing on me from the inside. I could have left it for tomorrow, but tomorrow meant waking up already one step behind. I could already picture the feeling, going to make coffee and realizing I couldn't, brushing my teeth with my finger like I was camping, improvising cleanup with paper towels that weren't there. It wasn't just inconvenience, it was a kind of disorder in the background that I couldn't stand. Dollar General was only 4 blocks away, open until midnight. The rain was light enough that I wouldn't even get wet if I wore my hood. I told myself I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in, 5, maybe 6 cars scattered far apart. One of the overhead lights near the far corner flickered erratically, casting shadows that seemed to twitch at the edges of my vision. A cold breeze slipped under my hood, carrying that sharp, damp smell that comes when rain has been sitting on asphalt all day. I caught myself thinking the word haunted, and then immediately told myself to cut the crap. It was a parking lot. Inside, the air was cool and still, with that faintly chemical clean scent of mop water undercut by the plasticky tang of packaged goods. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, their light just a little too harsh for the hour. The only person I saw was the cashier, a young guy leaning on the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright, eyes glued to his phone. I passed without drawing his attention. I grabbed a plastic basket with a wobbly handle and started toward the cleaning supplies. The aisles were empty, my footsteps sounding louder than they should, each squeak of rubber against tile bouncing back at me. The shelves were a mix of overstocked and half-forgotten, rows of generic cereal next to mismatched laundry detergent, off-brand batteries in slightly dusty packaging. I turned into the far aisle and stopped. At first, I thought she was part of some display, maybe an old Halloween prop shoved into the clearance section and left there. She was standing perfectly still between 2 leaning shelves, one lined with gallon jugs of bleach, the other cluttered with unsold plastic pumpkins and tangled bags of fake spiderwebs. Her stillness was wrong. Not casual, not the stillness of someone browsing. It was deliberate, like she'd settled into that exact position for a reason. And then she looked at me. Not just looked. Stared. Her gaze was sharp and fixed, her expression caught somewhere between anger and accusation. She was maybe mid-30s, her dark hair hanging in damp strands that clung to her cheeks. Her clothes were plain, black hoodie, faded jeans, worn-out sneakers, but her eyes cut through everything else. It felt targeted, like I'd done something to her without realizing it. I turned away quickly, forcing my attention to the shelf in front of me. Just a person, I told myself. Maybe lost in thought. Maybe not even looking at me. My brain had a habit of finding danger where there wasn't any. I picked up a bottle of dish soap, dropped it into the basket, kept moving. When I circled back toward the front of the store, I glanced down the aisle again. She was still there, still watching. A tight, cold feeling crawled up my spine. I didn't linger. I grabbed deodorant, paper towels, toothpaste, and made for the register. The cashier rang me up without a word, eyes never leaving his phone. I shoved my change into my pocket and, without meaning to, looked toward the back corner one last time. She was gone. Relief came in a shallow breath as I stepped outside, the cool night air brushing my face. I told myself it had been nothing, a trick of my own nerves. And then I saw her. She was in the parking lot, 50 feet behind my car, standing next to a rusted sedan that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Her arms hung at her sides, her gaze locked on me. Under the flickering yellow light, her eyes seemed too bright, too sharp against the dark. I walked to my car faster than I meant to, unlocking it with shaking hands, sliding inside and locking the doors immediately. In the rearview mirror, she hadn't moved. She stayed there as I backed out, as I turned onto the main road, as the distance swallowed her into the rain-dark night. For 2 nights, I didn't go back. But avoidance has its own pull, and soon I was circling the store in my head, telling myself it was ridiculous to let one strange encounter chase me away from a place I'd been going for years. When I ran out of supplies again, I went. The store was quieter than before, the air heavier somehow. She was there, in the same spot, same stillness. But this time, when our eyes met, her mouth curved upward. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too far, too slow, as though her face had forgotten how to make the expression and was relearning it in real time. I left without buying anything. That was a week ago. Now I see her in places I can't explain. Across the grocery store parking lot, on the opposite train platform when I visit friends. Always far enough away that I can't be sure, but near enough that I feel watched. At night, I hear footsteps outside my apartment, slow and deliberate. Once, there was a knock, 3 steady taps. I didn't answer. I've stopped sleeping well. Some nights I hear my name whispered from somewhere close, stretched out like it's being tested in an unfamiliar mouth. A damp, earthy smell lingers in my apartment without reason. I told myself I wouldn't go back to that store, and yet in the rain one Friday night I did. She was waiting, her head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on mine like she'd been expecting me. The smile was already there. "What do you want?" I asked. "You came back," she said in a voice flat and almost without gender. She turned and walked into the shadows at the far end of the aisle. I followed. The back storage area was dim, the light flickering overhead. She was gone. The air smelled of wet concrete. When I left, the parking lot was empty. The rusted sedan was gone. That was the last time I saw her clearly. Now it's only glimpses, in the edge of my vision, in a rain-smeared reflection. I tell myself it's nothing. But deep down, I think she's waiting. And the worst part is, I think I'm going to go back. I never expected my first real job to teach me what fear feels like when it lives under your skin. When I moved to Chicago right after college, I thought I was stepping into something big, a fresh start, a place where things could finally happen for me. I had my degree in media studies, a couple of internships, and a whole lot of shaky optimism. But the city moves fast, and it doesn't slow down for you. Within a month, my savings were gone. Job applications vanished into the void. Interviews ended with polite smiles and rejection emails. My days blurred into a mess of bus rides and unanswered calls from my mother asking if I'd heard anything yet. Rent was coming due, my grocery budget was collapsing into ramen and black coffee, and I was starting to understand the quiet panic that sits behind people's eyes when they realize no one's coming to help. That's when I saw it. A faded "Now Hiring" sign taped crookedly inside the greasy glass door of a Dollar Tree on West Belmont. The kind of place where the floor tiles never quite match. The air smells faintly like plastic and pine cleaner, and the fluorescent lights hum with the same tired rhythm no matter the time of day. I didn't think twice. I went in, filled out the form, and got hired the same afternoon. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant a paycheck. And right then, that was enough. The first few weeks were a blur of price tags and plastic bins, stocking paper plates and knockoff detergent, smiling at customers who looked through me like I was part of the shelf. I burned my fingertips on the shrink-wrap machine more times than I could count. My feet ached every night. But then I met Cass. She started the same week as me, just a couple of days behind. Short, wiry, with hair the color of honey that she always tied up messily. She had a dry, sarcastic humor that could cut through any bad mood. Cass didn't have much of a safety net either. She told me once during a smoke break that she'd been living on her own since she was 19. No family to fall back on. No real plan except to keep moving forward, no matter how exhausting it was. We leaned on each other fast, swapping snacks during slow hours, venting about customers, even talking our manager into scheduling us together for most of our shifts. Working with her made the grind bearable. Then he started showing up. The first time was a Friday night, about 20 minutes before close. I was restocking candy at the front counter when the door chimed, and in walked a man who looked like he'd stepped out of an alley 2 blocks over. Tall but thin in that way that made his jacket hang off him like a borrowed coat. A faded brown windbreaker with a frayed collar, jeans stiff with dirt, boots scuffed down to the raw leather. His hair was cut unevenly like someone had hacked at it with dull scissors. There was a smell that came with him, stale smoke and something metallic like wet pennies. He bought a small bottle of water and a pack of chocolate chip cookies, paid in crumpled bills, didn't make eye contact, except he did. Not in the normal, fleeting way strangers look at you during a transaction. His eyes stayed on us, on me, then Cass, longer than was comfortable. Too still, like he was measuring something. I brushed it off. We got weird customers all the time, but the next Friday he came back, and the next, always around the same time, 20 minutes to close like clockwork. His order varied a little. Sometimes it was a candy bar, sometimes a drink. But his routine didn't. He'd linger in the aisles long enough to make you notice, but not long enough to be suspicious in a way you could explain. And always his eyes would drift to us. One night after he left, Cass muttered while counting change. He stares at us. You see that, right? I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah, probably just some lonely guy. But I didn't believe that. Not really. The weeks rolled on, and he kept coming. I started to notice little details, the way he'd glance at the clock, how his hands never seemed to leave his pockets, how he always picked the register line where Cass or I were working, even if it meant bypassing an empty one. It became a silent tension between us. We never said his name because we didn't know it, but we didn't have to. "He's here," was enough to set both our shoulders rigid. Then came the storm. It was late April, one of those nights when the sky turns the color of steel before tearing open. Rain hammered the windows and the wind rattled the glass doors. The store was empty. Our manager had left early. He always did on Fridays, so it was just me and Cass killing the last half hour before close. She was breaking down boxes in the back and I was wiping down the counter when I saw him. Sitting in the far corner of the store, near the seasonal aisle, hands folded on the table like he was waiting for something. He hadn't bought anything. I tried to keep my voice casual when I called out, "Cass, he's still here." She came up front, took one look, and her jaw tightened. The man stood, walked slowly toward the counter. His sleeves were soaked, rainwater dripping onto the linoleum. His eyes moved between us before settling on Cass. "Need anything before we close?" I asked, forcing the words through a dry throat. "I'm not hungry," he said. Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. Then he smiled, showing uneven, yellowed teeth. "But I am lonely." Cass's hand slipped toward the panic button under the register, but she didn't press it. The man leaned closer. "Been coming here for weeks, watching. You're pretty." I stepped between them, my voice sharper than I intended. "You need to leave." He raised his hands mockingly. "Not talking to you." His eyes didn't leave her. "Just your number, sweetheart, that's all." When Cass didn't respond, his right hand moved, not toward his wallet but lower. My stomach turned. "Get the hell out," I said, louder now. He chuckled. "No need to be rude." Then, suddenly, he lunged toward her. I didn't think. I slammed into him with enough force to knock him against the counter. He stumbled, went down hard, the sound of his head hitting the floor sharp in my ears. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Cass's arm. We bolted through the doors into the downpour, the cold rain shocking against my skin. We didn't stop until we were halfway across the parking lot, under the flicker of a busted streetlight. Cass was shaking. He was... "I know," I said, fumbling for my phone with wet hands. By the time the cops arrived, he was gone. The police took our statements under the dripping awning while the rain drummed steadily on the roof. Red and blue lights bled over the wet sidewalk, distorting everything into jittery flashes. 2 officers scribbled in small notepads, asking the same questions in slightly different ways, like they were trying to catch us in a lie. "What exactly did he say to you? Describe his build again? You're sure you haven't seen him outside of work?" We told them everything, and still I could see the look in their eyes, that quiet, practiced dismissal that says, "Yeah, we get weirdos all the time." By the time they left, the store felt different. The same humming lights, the same cheap aisles of cleaning spray and candy bars, but it all seemed thinner, like the walls weren't as solid as they'd been before. The next few days, Cass and I tried to act like nothing had changed. We joked about customers, swapped snacks during lunch breaks, but the tension sat there, an unspoken weight between us. Our manager reviewed the security footage, but the grainy camera near the front counter didn't capture his hand or the exact words. Just a silent, jerky image of us standing across from a tall man in a rain-soaked jacket. "We can ban him," the manager said, scratching his thinning hair. "If he shows up again, call the cops." "That's it?" Cass asked, her voice sharp. "What do you want me to do? He's gone." It was hard to argue with that. For the first few nights, every time the door chimed, my stomach dropped. I caught myself scanning the parking lot every few minutes. Cass was worse. She kept the panic button half-pressed any time a man lingered too close to the counter. But the days passed, then a week, then 2. No sign of him. I started to believe maybe it was over. It was a Thursday night when Cass vanished. We'd been closing together, just the 2 of us, as usual, laughing about some ridiculous Dollar Tree product we'd found in the back, a pack of Halloween napkins in April. She'd grabbed her cigarettes and said, "Be back in 10, heading out the back door into the alley. I barely noticed. I was restocking the gum rack when I realized 20 minutes had passed, then 30. I walked to the back, pushed open the door. The alley was empty except for the rain-slick concrete and a thin curl of smoke rising from her still-lit cigarette lying on the ground. "Cass?" Silence. A cold knot formed in my chest. I stepped farther out, the damp air seeping into my shirt. My voice came out too loud, echoing against the brick walls. "Cass!" Nothing. I ran back inside, hands trembling so hard I almost dropped my phone. I called her, straight to voicemail, called again. Nothing. The panic was hot now, searing. I dialed our manager, then 911. By the time the police arrived, I could barely speak. They searched the alley, the side streets, even the convenience store across the road. Nothing. She was gone. The hours bled into days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time my phone rang, I felt the same sick lurch. 4 days later, the call came. They'd found her body in a wooded area near the highway. I don't remember most of what they told me, only fragments. She'd been stripped halfway, bruised, violated, left in the mud. When they caught him, he was squatting in an abandoned trailer less than a mile from where they'd found her. Same brown windbreaker, same scuffed boots. He confessed without much prompting. Said he'd been watching her for months. Said he knew her schedule. Said he waited for the right moment. He got life in prison. But what does that fix? It doesn't bring her back. It doesn't erase the image of that cigarette burning on wet pavement. It doesn't stop the dreams, the ones where I'm in the store alone and the lights go out. and I feel breath on my neck before I even turn around. I quit the Dollar Tree the morning after the news. Couldn't even walk past the building without seeing her face in the aisles. Cass should have been safe. She should still be here, complaining about the smell of the mop water or making fun of my playlist. But she's not. And I will never forgive myself for letting her walk out that door. Sometimes, when the wind hits just right, I swear I can smell that same metallic tang in the air. The one he carried with him, the one I thought was just the rain, and every time, I wonder, if I'd gone looking sooner, would I have been the one who disappeared instead? It began with a smell I couldn't place, a thin metallic tang that didn't belong in my aunt's trailer. It slid in under the door the way cold air does in the middle of a Kansas winter, quiet and insistent, and it stayed long enough for me to start wondering if it was coming from inside. I remember sitting there on the sagging couch, TV flickering with some canned laugh sitcom I wasn't paying attention to, and realizing I was breathing in wrong. Not fast, not panicked, just wrong. Like my lungs were tasting the air for something they didn't want to find. That was months before the knock. Before the police reports, the flashlight beams cutting across unpaved yards, the whispered, "Thank God it wasn't you," from women at the diner. Before his name felt like a nail in the back of my throat. Back then it was just me and Aunt Tina, the two of us thrown together after my mom's sudden death. A stroke, they said. 1 second she was stirring soup on the stove, the next she was gone. No warning, no last words, just silence where she used to be. I'd been 22, broke, and flattened under a kind of grief that made everything taste bland. Aunt Tina took me in without fuss. She had a double wide at the edge of Lenora, a town too small to hide in, and a job at Dot's Diner that kept her away most nights. She smoked menthols in the kitchen with the window cracked, no matter the weather, her ashtray balanced on the sill like a fixture of the place. The job at Dollar Haven came quick. April, the manager, called 2 days after I dropped off an application. I didn't ask questions about pay or hours. When you've got a dead mom and $28 in the bank, you don't haggle over $9.75 an hour. The store sat behind a BP station like it was hiding from the road, its flickering fluorescent sign missing the H in Haven. Everyone in town called it Dollar Haven, which felt right. At first, working nights was easy. The customers were predictable. Drunks looking for chips, bored teenagers killing time, old men buying the same brand of candy every week. Sometimes someone would say something a little off, but small-town weird isn't the same as dangerous. Or at least I thought so. I learned how to smile in a way that didn't invite conversation. Then November rolled in, bringing wind that could cut skin. It was a Thursday, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. I was folding a stack of knockoff t-shirts when the door chime sounded. I looked up expecting to see one of the regulars, but it wasn't anyone I knew. Mid-30s, average build, Carhartt jacket with the elbows worn soft, jeans with ground-in dust. His hair was unremarkable, but his eyes, God, those eyes, they stayed open just a fraction too long between blinks, enough to make you notice. "Hi there, welcome in," I said, my voice on autopilot. He didn't answer, just stood by the entrance for a beat too long, scanning the place like he was counting something. Then he headed to aisle 5, cheap electronics, discount earbuds, off-brand chargers. He walked it slow, back and forth, without picking anything up. When he finally came to the register, he set down 2 Monster energy drinks and a charger. "You work here every night?" he asked. "Most nights," I said, scanning the drinks. "You from around here?" "Kinda," I said. "Need a bag?" "You got a boyfriend?" The register beeped. I could feel my face tighten. "I'm just trying to finish my shift," I said, keeping my tone light enough to pass. "You sure? I got a real nice truck. We could go for a ride. Just talk." I gave him his change without looking at him. "No thanks." He didn't move, just watched me. The moment broke only when 2 teenagers came in laughing about some TikTok. He walked out without another word. I told myself it was just small-town awkwardness, until he came back. 40 minutes later, same jacket, same eyes, same way of going straight to the counter. "You off work yet?" he asked. "No," I said, sharper this time. He glanced at the door, then at the corners of the store like he was checking escape routes. "I'll wait. Can't be long now." There were two girls near the candy, their chatter loud enough to make me feel less alone. "Listen, I'm not interested. You need to leave." His grin stayed fixed. "You'll change your mind. I always get what I want." He turned to leave, but before the door closed, he looked back. "I'll find out more about you." That stuck in my ribs. I didn't tell April, pride maybe, or fear that she'd just tell me I was overreacting. But I started carrying a box cutter in my coat pocket. Checked the back seat before unlocking my car. 3 nights later, he came in again. This time, he skipped the small talk. "Hello, Madison Reed." My name. I wasn't wearing a tag. Never had. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "I've got friends. They know things. Small town," he said, and walked out. I locked myself in the stockroom and called April. She sighed, said he was probably bluffing, told me to keep my eyes open. That night I was home alone. Tina was pulling a double. I locked the doors, checked the windows, tried to drown the unease with ramen and reruns. At midnight the knock came. Slow, heavy, measured. I froze, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I peeked through the blinds. He was on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes locked on mine. The knock came again. Then the screen door creaked open, the deadbolt holding the only line between us. "Madison," he said, voice low and steady. "I know you're home." I stepped back, phone in hand, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. "Not this late. I saw your aunt leave earlier." The dispatcher told me to stay on the line. It took 10 minutes for the cops to arrive. 10 minutes of him standing there just breathing. When the cruiser pulled up, he didn't run. They gave him a trespass warning and told me to call if he came back. For a while he didn't. I switched to day shifts, avoided walking anywhere alone. Then one afternoon, I overheard a woman in the store whisper to her daughter about a girl named Lexi from Hutchinson. Worked nights at a gas station. Found tied up in the back of a trailer. Lexi and I had trained together once. Same age, same build. We'd even taken a photo together at a work party. It was on Facebook. Tagged. That night I deleted everything. Went to the sheriff. This time they listened. His name was Curtis Leland. Prior arrests for harassment, attempted assault, nothing that stuck. When they found him, he was living in a rusted camper outside town. Inside were photos of me, Lexi, other women I didn't know, printouts from social media, notes with addresses and schedules, zip ties, duct tape. Lexi identified him as her attacker. He was arrested, denied bail, and is still waiting for trial. I left Lenora soon after. New number, new address, new life. But I still lock my doors 3 times every night. And sometimes, I wake up certain there's someone outside, breathing the same cold air I am. Because it never felt like a monster, it felt like a man. A man who blinked too little, who knew my name before I'd spoken it, who looked at me like I'd already been chosen. And the part I can't shake, the thing that gnaws at me when the house settles late at night, isn't wondering why he picked me. It's wondering who he's watching now. I used to think I understood the weight of a quiet room. Not the kind of quiet that makes you relax, but the kind that presses in from all sides. Dense, deliberate, almost sentient. The kind of quiet that reminds you you're alone, even when you're not. The gallery had that kind of quiet most nights. It wasn't big, 3 modest rooms, a front desk, a narrow hallway that led to a tiny back office and a storage closet. We sat between a pawn shop that never changed its neon sign and a liquor store that smelled like warm beer even from the parking lot. But inside, I'd managed to give it a different kind of life. Track lighting angled just so, soft jazz murmuring under the hum of the AC, the smell of pine cleaner layered over the faint musk of old canvas. My little kingdom. I wasn't born an art dealer. Hell, I barely made it through college. But storytelling was my thing. On paper, in person, on stage at the little community theater before it shut down. I liked watching people lean forward in their chairs, eyes bright, forgetting for a moment that there was a world outside the one I built for them. Then life happened. A phone call in the middle of the night. An accident on an icy road. One of those clean, devastating breaks that rearrange the bones of your life. Now, I told stories through other people's work. Paintings, prints, the occasional sculpture. I thought it was safer. Less dangerous than letting my own head spill out onto paper. That was before him. It was early evening, midweek, the last hour before close when the sun turns that burnt amber and paints the strip mall windows in long diagonal stripes. I'd been rearranging a set of framed charcoal sketches on the east wall, more for something to do than necessity. That's when I heard the door open. The bell gave its half-hearted jingle. He walked in like he'd been here before, but I would have remembered him. Tall, but not in an elegant way. His frame was lanky, elbows and knees sharp under a rumpled gray coat that looked damp around the cuffs. Dark hair stuck in awkward tufts, like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. And those hands, long fingers, knuckles like knobs. He carried something tucked under one arm, pressed tight to his ribs. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice easy, the way you do when you're not sure if someone's here to buy something or just get out of the cold. He didn't answer. He walked slow, his shoes making that soft squeak of wet rubber on polished floor. His eyes moved across the walls, each piece getting the same unblinking stare like he was measuring them against something in his head. I noticed he never looked at me directly. "Looking for anything in particular?" I asked. He stopped near the middle of the room, turned his head just enough that I could see the side of his face. His cheek was pale and smooth, but his jaw looked tight, as if he was holding back a word or a cough. Then, without warning, he crossed the room to the front desk and set the thing he'd been carrying down. It was a sketchbook. Not the kind you buy in a hobby store with neat spiral binding and a clean cover. This one was thick, the leather warped and blotched with stains that looked old. The edges were frayed, the stitching uneven like someone had tried to repair it more than once. It had weight to it, the kind you feel in your wrist when you pick it up. "I don't need it anymore," he said finally. His voice was softer than I expected, but strained, like the sound of paper tearing. Before I could respond, he turned and walked out. No glance back, no hesitation, just out into the fading light and gone. The bell over the door gave its weak jingle again, and then the room swallowed the sound whole. I stood there for a long minute, hands resting on the desk edge. I've seen people leave weird things behind before, a pair of glasses, an umbrella, once a half-empty bottle of cough syrup. But this felt different. There was something deliberate about the way he'd placed it there, like a transaction had taken place, only I didn't know my side of the bargain yet. The leather felt rough under my fingertips when I finally touched it. Cold, too, as if it had been left somewhere damp before he brought it here. I flipped it open. The first page was blank, but not clean. There were faint smudges, as if something had been erased hard enough to leave scars in the paper. The next few pages were sketches, not landscapes or portraits, nothing I could identify at first. Shapes that twisted into each other, lines looping and fracturing. The more I looked, the more the shapes seemed to shift, like they were resisting being understood. About 10 pages in, the drawings started to take on a more deliberate form. Figures, thin, angular, with limbs too long and heads tilted at wrong angles. They stood in groups of 3 or 4, always facing the same direction, as if they were watching something I couldn't see. And scattered through every page were symbols, small, careful etchings, almost like runes or shorthand, tucked into corners or hidden in the folds of the figure's clothing. I realized my pulse had picked up. The air in the gallery felt heavier, like the temperature had dropped a degree or two. I told myself it was just the quiet, the strange gift, the fact that I was alone. But I found myself glancing toward the front door, half expecting him to come back. Instead, the bell stayed silent. The sun dropped lower, turning the gallery light more gold than white. I kept flipping pages, unable to stop even as something in my gut told me I should. Near the back of the book there was a full-page drawing that made my stomach twist. It was the gallery. My gallery. The perspective was from the back corner, near the office door, looking out toward the front desk and windows. Every detail was right. The arrangement of the frames, the pattern on the rug, even the chip in the wood molding by the east wall. But there was someone standing in the center of the room. Not me. Not anyone I recognized. Just a tall, thin figure, head bowed, hands hanging at its sides. I closed the book, hard. The sound echoed in the empty room. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty now. The pawn shop's neon sign buzzed faintly. A gust of wind rattled something metallic in the alley. I slid the sketchbook under the counter, telling myself I'd figure out what to do with it later. Call the police, maybe, or toss it in the dumpster behind the liquor store. But even as I locked up and stepped out into the cooling air, I knew I wouldn't. Not yet. I walked to my car with the keys gripped so tightly in my fist that the teeth dug into my palm. The air felt heavier than it should have for that time of evening, cool, but dense, like something you could push your hands through. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder twice before I even reached the driver's side door. Nothing. Just the wide, half-lit parking lot and the occasional shape of a moth smacking into one of the street lamps. I got in, shut the door, and sat there a moment with the engine off. The faint ticking of the cooling metal filled the silence, and I realized my heart was still going faster than it should. I could picture the drawing in my head without even trying. Every clean black line of the gallery, every inch of that bowed head in the center of the floor. Whoever had drawn it had been there. Recently. Close enough to notice the chip in the molding that even I barely registered anymore. I told myself maybe the artist had been in during the day, browsing. Maybe they'd bought something or just quietly sketched while I was busy with a customer. That would explain it. Except it wouldn't explain the figure. I drove home on autopilot, the same 10-minute route I'd taken for years, but it felt different. Each red light stretched longer than usual. The people walking their dogs on the sidewalks didn't look at me, but my brain still told me they were aware of me in some way I couldn't pin down. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sight of my own darkened living room window made me pause. For the first time in years, I considered leaving the porch light on all night. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and went straight for the small drafting table in the corner of my living room. I hadn't touched it in weeks, not since business at the gallery had picked up, but I kept it clean. That night, without really thinking, I pulled out a sheet of paper and a soft pencil. I don't know why. Maybe it was to get the drawing out of my head. I sketched the gallery from memory, my own version, different angle, closer to the front windows. My hand was steady at first, but the longer I worked, the less I seemed to control where the lines were going. I wasn't trying to copy the sketchbook figure, but halfway through shading the floor, I realized I'd left a space. A blank oval right in the middle. My pencil hovered over it. I told myself to shade it in, make it nothing. Instead, my fingers moved before I could stop them. The figure took shape. Tall, thin, head bowed, hands hanging at its sides. I dropped the pencil and shoved back from the table hard enough to make the chair legs screech against the floor. I didn't even want to look at the paper anymore. It wasn't that it was a perfect match for the other drawing. It was that it felt like I hadn't drawn it at all. Like my hand had just been the tool. I shoved the sheet into a drawer and slammed it shut. The rest of the night I tried to distract myself with TV, but every time the room went quiet during commercials I could hear the faint sound of graphite dragging on paper in my head. By midnight I gave up and went to bed, but sleep didn't feel like rest. When I woke, it was still dark. For a second, I thought it was just early morning, but then I realized the alarm clock wasn't lit. Power was out. The house felt strange without the faint hum of electricity, like it was holding its breath. I lay there, listening. Nothing from outside. No cars, no wind. Just the creak of the walls settling. Then faintly, something else. A slow, deliberate shuft, shuft, shuft. The sound of pencil on paper. I froze. It was coming from the living room. I sat up, every nerve in my body screaming not to move, and forced myself to listen again. The sound stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I eased the bedroom door open and peered down the hall. Moonlight from the front windows spilled across the living room floor. My drafting table was just visible in the glow. The chair was pulled out. The drawer with the drawing I'd hidden the night before was open. The paper was on the table again, and the figure in the middle. It wasn't just standing anymore. Its head was tilted slightly up, toward me. I didn't scream, but my breath caught in a way that hurt. I grabbed my phone from the counter and turned the flashlight on, aiming it toward the table. Nothing moved. The paper didn't change. I backed into my bedroom and shut the door. This time I locked it. When morning finally came, the power was back. The normal sounds of the neighborhood returned. Trash trucks, distant dogs barking. But the drawing was still there on the table, the figure's face still angled toward where I'd been standing. I told myself to throw it out. Burn it even. But I didn't. Instead, I went to the gallery early, before opening, and pulled the sketchbook out from under the counter. I flipped to the back again. There was a new drawing. Same view of the gallery as before, but this time the tall figure was closer to the front windows, closer to the door, and standing next to it, smaller but unmistakable, was another figure. Me.